Hi, everyone, guys. Happy New Year. This is Simeon again from Elevate.Strategy. We have another wonderful Leadership Live fire chat today. But yeah, indeed, Happy New Year. It's the second week of January. It's my first interview of the new year. And actually, maybe the last one for the time being right now for season one. So if you remember, if you've been following me since last March, I've had guests coming on about every week, and the topic of the series has been around stories, so career stories. And again, one of the reasons why it's important to me that that's there is because LinkedIn seems to be a really good place for technical knowledge about how to write resumes and how to present yourself in a better way. But there have never really been a forum for people to tell their career stories. And why has been important is, as an executive coach, a lot of my clients have uh, quite actually sort of lacked confidence in what they've been doing in their career. Many of them are very successful, and I think part of the problem is that when you're sort of at the top, it's quite lonely, and it's tempting to say that, am I the only one going through this transition period? So, whenever I have my guests out, it's really great to hear their stories. I learn a lot about them in real time, and I'm just as amazed as you are. So today, without exception, we have a wonderful guest, Mike Leader. Him and I go back a long way. He's probably one of the first people that I met in my career because it came from my first role as well. And so, before we go further, so in January, um, what I want to update you guys on, we had a lot of work around board work. So people who are looking for board seats. And that's been popularized, I think, by some things in the media before Christmas, but a lot of demand for board coaching. And so if you are today looking for some sort of a board role or a senior executive role, please do reach out to me. I've got a lot more exposure to that kind of work in recent months than ever before. So anyway, without further ado, let me introduce you to my guest this afternoon. So this week we're joined by Mike Leader, as I said earlier, and he's the managing director, head of operations, and part of the global leadership team at CPP Investments in Toronto, Canada. Mike has deep experience in transformational leadership, building high caliber cross functional global teams focused on all aspects of trade lifecycle, customer success, and retention, scaling global businesses, complex problem solving, and COO type responsibilities. And he has said these are really big words, but he's promised me that he's going to break it down and actually tell us what he does. But Mike is a strategic hands on leader in operations, risk management, and finance. He is able to ideate, develop, and translate key business strategies into high impact action and financial results, regardless of the industry or function, which deliver exceptional customer experience satisfaction as well. So, without further ado, I will bring Mike to the front stand and let's introduce him. Hey, Mike.
Hey, Simeon, how are you?
Good. Thank you for coming on the show. And Happy New Year. You're the first guest of 2022 and potentially the last one of this season of my series on story topics. So we reserve the best for the last, per
I'm
se.
honored.
And I've been trying to get you on the show, I think, since before Christmas. So I'm glad you're able to kind of fit this into your calendar. Um, but really, just kind of going back to our history together. So we first met probably at Deloitte Consulting, where it was
Yeah.
my first gig coming out of business school, and you were already a known entity there, very very clear as far as being a leader. I think in financial services, even at that point, but I could be mistaken. But in any case, that's where we met, and I think you left the firm earlier than I did. But I've been sort of watching and tracking some of the stories behind your journey so far, and it's an exceptional story that I think one a lot of my clients should really take to heart, and which is you did take a break from the big bad good corporate world and kind of spend some time sort of thinking about what you wanted to do, and now you're back in place. So uh, why don't you maybe sort of share with us what it is that you do in plain English, as you said, and yeah, for people who don't know you, it'd be great to hear.
Sure, yeah, no problem. And thanks for having me. I appreciate it. There's one thing I love doing is talking about my journey and my career.
Yeah.
Love sharing that information. But Yeah, and as plain English as I can. So I run the operations team at CPP Investments. For those that don't know, CPP Investments is the fund. We manage the Canadian pension plan, and we
Okay.
ensure that basically that plan is there and in place and sustainable for years to come for the 22 million Canadians that are part of it. The team that I'm responsible for is the operations team. So
Okay.
essentially, everything in the background, settling trades, managing money, setting up structures within our systems, etc. For everything that the fund does, that's our responsibility. So I have a pretty large team there, a lot of different sort of experiences and backgrounds. So that's exciting. But I also sit on the global leadership team. So I'm one of our MDs on that. So I also have accountability for ensuring that we're, managing our culture appropriately, that we're doing the right things around recognition and reward. And that, we're really truly thinking about, one fund and what that means and how that applies to the different areas. So it's, you kind of have your dual hats, your day to day run my team. And then the other one is, okay, I'm responsible to make sure that this fund runs properly as well.
Right. Gotcha. And not everyone who's watching understands the world of investments. Maybe
Right.
if you could share a little bit about what that actually means, like how
Sure.
does that impact Canadians and your customers?
Absolutely. So if I could give probably a bit of, well, I've been at CPP IB for 9 months now, so I'll give the history lesson that I know. I'm not,
Sure.
but essentially we were set up by an active government about 25 years ago. And it was on the back of some analysis done by the finance minister at the time saying, we have a pool of funds called the Canadian Pension Plan, and we need to make sure that this is sustainable for the long term. And all the analysis we've done back in the 90s is saying it's going to run out by 2020 something. So what do we do to ensure that we can sustain it? And so they set up the Canadian Pension Plan Investment Board. And basically what we do is we take funds, we get I don't say a check, but we get funds from Ottawa every week, which is on your paycheck, that piece that says CPP.
Right.
You get those funds. And then as an organization, we invest those on a global basis. And we
Gotcha.
invest it from private equity, infrastructure, sustainable energy, real estate.
Right.
We go into the public markets as well, so fixed income like products, and
Mhm.
we ensure that we're bringing a return. We don't want to put it at risk because obviously there's the Canadians that sit behind it, but
Right.
we want to make sure that we bring a return to ensure that this is sustainable.
Gotcha.
In the most recent analysis they did, I think they've said that if you were to just, take the fund in its current state, so we're over 500 billion CAD now. If you were to take it in its current state and put it in a, money market, return for X period, it would survive 75 years now.
Wow. Okay.
Which we didn't have before.
Right.
So in that sense, it's interesting. We're global in nature too. So we invest all over the world. We have 9 offices globally now. Canadian Pension Plan is a major player in the pension plan and in the investment field globally.
Right.
We own, locally, we own, real estate buildings. We own the 407, for example. But then even, we have a lot of investments in India, in Europe, and it's kind of across the board. I wouldn't do it justice trying to explain it all, but
Sure.
but that's essentially what we do.
Gotcha. So, maybe so a large part of this conversation is really trying to understand how you got to where you are today.
Yeah.
So I would love to kind of skip to there right now and just
Sure.
if you could share, as far back as you'd like to, how is it that you navigated through your career, right? So where did you start up with? What was your passion and interest at the very beginning, and then what was your sort of decision making, criteria to get to where you are today? I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've got an interesting one because, I never had my career planned out. I never said that this is what I want to do or this is where I want to go. I just recognized early what the skill sets were that I had. I was strong in math, strong in numbers. I had a penchant for business. I had family that had been, sales and trading in banks, etc. So I kind of gravitated towards that space early on. So through school and math, my first job was with one of the Canadian banks on a trade floor. But I didn't necessarily have a passion for it. So I went back to business school. Business school was to try and, figure out who I wanted to be and what I wanted to do and understand that, what the skills that I had in my tool set. And that's when I came out and worked at Deloitte, because I felt Deloitte really gave me an opportunity to see a whole lot more, see a lot more of different industries, different skill sets, etc. But I ended up back, as you mentioned, in financial services, because that was where people saw that I had assets, because I understood banking. I understood how banks work.
Right.
Understand how they made money. And so that was really how I ended up doing what I was doing there. I ended up in the banks. I left Deloitte after a number of years, but I ended up back in the banks because of basically a personal life change. I was having kids. And as a consultant, you tend to either travel or you're at the whim of a partner in terms of where you're going to go and what you're going to do.
Right.
And starting a family, that wasn't something that I wanted. I wanted to have ownership. I wanted to have accountability. I had someone, if you remember, Deloitte, we had coaches and we had, counselors, and
Yeah.
I sat with a counselor once at Deloitte, and, I asked him for some advice, and he said, you really need to figure out, do you live to work or do you work to live?
Right. Yeah.
And that has stuck with me now. I mean, that was almost 20 years ago. And everything I do now, I keep reminding myself, do I work to live or do I live to work?
Right.
And for me, that was a decision that made it pretty easy to say, all right, you know what, I need to be first and foremost for my family.
Mm-hmm.
That's what matters to me. And I'm going to find something that fits into that. And I ended up at TD Bank. Again, through a connection, I ended up in a space that I didn't know a lot about. So I ran an operational risk team in the early days of operational risk management. But what I knew I brought to the table was like a skill set that was very broad. I wasn't a depth guy. I wasn't an expert in any area. I had this breadth of experience. And that's what I've kind of carried through my career since then too, is I don't always say that I'm known as someone with a depth. I'm not an expert in my field. I always know enough to be dangerous, in the sense that I understand it enough to be, to be able to hold a conversation and be smart.
So Mike, I want to go back just very quickly, and for the audience who's joining us now, if you could drop a comment below about where you're from, that'd be great. I'd love to know the expanse of Mike's fan base. Sorry, I detract because I was telling Mike earlier that announcing your interview, even only one day in advance, garnered the most likes and everything else underneath. So there's got to be a fan base. But and if you're working with Mike and he's a boss of yours, this is a great opportunity to ask him some personal questions, because it's awkward otherwise. So drop a comment below, drop a question below, and that'd be great. If not, that's fine. Let me ask you about the transition from consulting to industry, because a lot of people ask that question to me, and vice versa, right? And what was that like? As far as I know, why you did so, but what did you have to let go of? What was the struggle behind that? There must have been something that kind of pulled you back. And
I would say the hardest part that I had with it was the pace. I was used to being in an environment where everything moved quickly.
Right.
There was always a timeline and a deadline that you were working to, and as you'd work late hours, you'd work through evenings. Like there was a pace to it, and it was fast paced, decisions made quickly. What I found when I got into the banking world is things didn't move as fast, and that really was a struggle for me, because I wanted decisions, and I wanted answers, and I wanted to be able to move and move and move.
Yeah.
And I felt, what I struggled with was I didn't think I was performing because I wasn't moving quickly enough, and I wasn't coming up with the answers quickly enough. And I soon figured out that that's not how it worked. The environment I was in, and I've seen it a lot, was more about, getting consensus and getting agreement and talking to different people. And I had to get my head wrapped around that, because that's not something I was used to.
Yeah.
So that was probably the biggest thing that really was the struggle for me. Moving into the corporate world, where I felt like I had more control, though, was actually a real positive, because that's the one thing I always felt in consulting, is I didn't feel like I always had control of my life.
Hmm.
I think I said before, I was always at the whim of the next project, and who knew where that would be.
Yep.
And I use an example of, having come back from a vacation abroad and landing in Vancouver to a phone call saying, oh, by the way, you're on a plane tomorrow morning to Philadelphia. And that was, oh, okay. That's what my life's like. And, that piece, getting that control back, knowing that, I could have a life, or I could, at least for myself, feel like I could have a life, back home was very positive in that sense. Did I lose you, Simeon?
Can you hear me, Mike?
Yes.
Okay. No, if I was just saying that anyone listening who's had sort of thoughts about transitioning over, if you could share with us some of the struggles you've been thinking about, that'd be great. But so, Mike, that was taking control was one of the reasons that you moved.
Yep.
Did you miss anything when you moved? Like, what was it that you had to
People.
let go? People.
The people. Like, I miss, so those that know me, I'm very much a people person. And I really miss the people, and I miss the, as you know, in the consulting space, it's, you're not necessarily siloed off. So you're always working with different people, different backgrounds, different experience sets. And working for the firm that we worked for, it was global in nature. So that was, having that access, or that felt like that access to people on a continuous basis to learn from, to grow from. I didn't feel like I had that right away when I hit the bank. As I progressed in my career, that improved, but I missed that right off the bat. I worked with a lot of smart people at Deloitte, tons of smart people, brilliant
Right.
people. And not to say that wasn't the case when I was in the bank, but that was the first piece that I missed. I felt kind of isolated. I kind of got into my team and I was like, all right, all I've got is this group around me where I had this expanse of knowledge in front of me. So that's the piece that I probably missed the most.
Right.
Yeah.
Gotcha. And so in this new environment, you had to get used to that kind of and the pace would have been more manageable in that sense.
Yeah.
Probably the depth that you would have gotten into as far as getting to know your team would also be a lot deeper, right? Trying to understand their strengths
Absolutely.
and their weaknesses. And so
Absolutely.
the nature of the work then, in the environment of the culture, right, of being in corporate versus in a consulting world. Tell us a little bit about the cultural differences that you experienced, um, demands of you. I know that things were a little bit slower at TD versus Deloitte, but I mean, that's normal. But what was the culture difference like?
Yeah, I mean, culturally, that was the one thing that I think I, benefited from, was I ended up somewhere that was really built on its culture,
Okay.
and its culture of customer service and customer experience. And that wasn't just about outwardly, that was inwardly as well, in terms of, how we treat our employees and how we develop, etc.
Yeah.
Well, in that sense, it was quite positive. It was a good place to be. What was interesting was, I was in capital markets. So that's my background is always capital markets. And when you're in a capital market space in a retail heavy bank, there's a bit of conflict. Capital markets wasn't back then always about customer service and customer experience. It was
Right.
about getting the deals
Right.
done, about how do we, about P&L, and how do you manage that? So that was always at conflict. But I think culturally, I ended up in a great place because of that. The bank is known for its people.
Mhm.
When I got there, people would always say, TD people bleed green. And first you kind of laugh about it, and then you get into it. You're like, oh wow, they really do. They really care about the organization. They care about its success. They care about where we're going. Like, passionately care.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I would say by the end, I was there for 15 years. I was in the same boat. You get
Right.
to a point where you just truly believe in everything that you're doing, that it becomes almost part of your DNA.
Right. So then fast forward then moving towards CPP, you
Yep.
had you had a correct me if I'm wrong, but you had a period of time where you took time off. Is that
Yep.
right? Okay. So what
Yep.
happened after TD then? So you grew in the organization, you started to bleed green. Guess you got scared that you're bleeding green and not red, maybe.
You know
But
what? So, I'll be like, part of me is being blatantly, like, very truthful and obvious, open. I had an opportunity to leave. I was given an opportunity to step away.
Okay.
And I chose that. I said, I've been here 15 years. By then I had moved. I'd started in Toronto. I'd gone to the UK for 4 years, and then I'd spent 6-7 years in New York.
Okay.
And I was given an opportunity to walk away after 15, and I took it. And I said, not many people at this stage of their career are given an opportunity to take a break like this, and somewhat of a risk-free break financially.
Right.
Why not? Why not take this time to sort of step back, reassess, what matters to me, kind of reset myself a little bit. I was at a point where, physically, mentally, it was tough. Like I felt personally, and, I maybe don't share with many people, I was struggling. I really was.
Right.
I'd been on such a great career path and really like explosive. And then I got to a point where I was really struggling to break through that next level. And I didn't know what it was. So when you're given the opportunity, I took it.
Right.
And it was great because it really did allow me to kind of think about what mattered, think about myself, my skills, what I wanted to do next, focus on me personally. So I spent when I left the first 6 months, 9 months, I didn't even think about a job. I didn't think about work. I thought about me, my mental fitness and my physical personal fitness were paramount. That's all that mattered.
Right.
And that was that period of time of just reflection, and then just enjoying that period of time,
right.
Which was great.
So in that period of time, were you ever concerned that your career would have a setback? Because some people are concerned to do that because they don't know what's going to happen after 6 months, right? Whether there's still going to be a market for them, or was it really just like you needed that time off, and at that point maybe you couldn't care less if it was going to be difficult to get back into the workforce? Did you ever have concerns?
Yes, obviously there were. Yeah, I was always nervous that when I get back into it, is there a market for someone like myself with my background and my experience?
Right.
And so I had to kind of set my own expectations in terms of what I might jump into or what I might lead into.
Right.
I did always know though that there was. I knew that there were opportunities out there, so I knew I could go into consulting. I knew that my background and my experience would lend itself well to those looking to do certain types of projects,
right.
Which is what I ended up doing actually before I joined CPP. I consulted for a while, for a period of time. But yeah, there were always worries like, what if I don't get what I want to do, or what if there isn't a market out there? COVID hit when I was within my break. That really kind of put a damper on things.
Right.
But then I always kind of stepped back and went, you know what? Good things happen to good people. And if I just stay positive about it, it'll eventually come. It might not be within the timing that I want, but it'll get there. And I've got myself and my family, and we've planned out how do we support ourselves through this. So I'm not overly worried in that sense. There comes a point in time where you've got to pay the bills, and where's the next paycheck going to come from? But I just kept reflecting on why this break was important to me, and so I stopped worrying about, or I didn't worry as much about whether I will or not. I knew I would. I didn't know when. I didn't know necessarily where. But I figured at some point I would get there.
And what was the biggest breakthrough that you remember, that if you were to summarize that period of time, that would summarize the result of your self-reflection, right? What was the breakthrough that finally said, you know what, I think I'm ready to go now because X, Y, and Z have been thought through carefully, and now going back into the corporate world, which is going to be very busy, I'm now ready to go. So what was the biggest revelation to yourself after all that?
Yeah, I would say that I was at a point that I recognized that I got really into reading this book, Atomic Habits by James Clear. And that was something for me that when I started taking that to heart around habit creation, it's going to sound kind of maybe cliche, but that really was a point in time for me where I'm like, okay, you know what? I've got good habits as it relates to physical and mental health.
Right.
I've got good habits in terms of, my family life and how to manage that. And I know how I can better manage that going forward. that I'm now happy to step back into the corporate world with the understanding that I'm going to control this now. I'm not going to let it control me.
Right. Right.
Because I'll go back to the habits and the things that matter. And then in terms of, I kind of had also a better idea of what it was that I was looking for. What will give me the challenge? What opportunities? Like, what was it that really excited me about my career up to a certain point?
Right.
And
Right.
that allowed me then to focus on, all right, as opportunities come up, for me, it was always all about change. I love change. I love building. I love, tearing things apart and rebuilding things. I'm not a great caretaker. Like I don't like just running a day to day. Like that for me, that's always a struggle. And so when I recognize that, if I can find those types of opportunities, regardless of where they are, whether they're, financial services, whether they're consumer business, didn't matter, fintechs, that would be something that would give me spirit and keep me engaged.
Gotcha. Yeah. And so coming out of that period of time, you did a podcast, right? Is that
Yep.
what you did,
Yeah.
the podcast too? So what was that like? What inspired you to? Do you have a voice? Do you have something to say?
You know what? It's funny because it was first and foremost, it was just, I wasn't ready to go back to work, but I wanted to challenge myself around learning a new skill. And podcasts seemed interesting. The technology about, well, how do you create? How do you produce? How do you put it out there? That was really interesting for me. I have a bit of a technical bend sometimes, so that was exciting. And then I had a good friend of mine who we just started talking about, this would be something to do. Everybody was in lockdown because it was the beginning of COVID.
Yeah.
What is it that we could share with the world? And we kind of said, well, we've got some interesting stories around leadership. He comes from a more kind of educational background. He's done a variety of different things. I came from sort of financial services and moved around the globe and ran large teams. Yeah, I'm sure, there'll be at least, 5 people that'll be willing to listen to us, and so we
Right.
thought this will be fun. This will be exciting. And so we kind of, we set out to do it. I'll be honest, we did 5 episodes, I think 4 or 5 episodes.
Right.
Realized how much work it is. So I commend you on doing this. It's a ton of work. But we really got a lot out of it. Like it was, what was interesting for me was being able to share my feedback on leadership and what mattered and how to get through things in a format that, I felt like people actually listened and people provided feedback and people were really positive on it. And so
Right.
that was really exciting. But it's the piece for me was just learning. Honestly, it was like learning how to publish it and how to splice music in, how to splice everything, like how to pull it all together was interesting.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
What was some of the feedback that you received from the content?
I think some of the feedback for me, at least for me, was people felt that we were very authentic, that we hit kind of the key points. I pride myself on being authentic. I pride myself on being, what you see is what you get. Like it's cliche, I know, but that's what I'm about. I'm about being real. And that really actually came through. I'd heard people say that in the past, in my old life of, being in town halls, and people would always say in QAs, you sound authentic. Like you really mean what you say.
Right.
The ability to do that then in a more public forum and people still say that, I'm like, okay, so I am really getting that across. And that for me was really positive. The other piece of it too was, what people felt was the contrast of, myself and my friend, we're friends back from high school, but then we played off each other really well. And, it was welcoming and warm and people cared what we said. And that for me was really positive too, because it, the idea that people really listen to what we had to say. Like we purposely made them it was like 22 minutes long. So they were quick and dirty and in and out. And we had a structure to them.
Yeah.
But the authenticism one was big because that just reassured me that, okay, I'm doing the right things. People care that you're authentic. People care about what I have to say. And that actually helped me as I went in to starting to work again, is like, you know what, I'm going to carry that through. I'm going to be who I am. I'm not going to change for the sake of, because someone wants me to. This is just, I'm going to be that person. I did that through all my information gathering sessions, all my interviews, not just CPP, but everywhere. And figured, if someone's going to hire me, they're going to hire me for who I am, and what I bring to the table. And so that actually helped me a lot when I was doing sort of my self-reflection.
Yeah, when I work with a lot of clients, I talk a lot about defining and articulating your value proposition, and really sharing very clearly and forthrightly what piece of the puzzle are you filling out for their gap, or what kind of problem are you trying to solve for them. But one of
Right.
the pieces of value proposition that we don't think about is two things: impact. So you need to be where you're supposed to be, is what I always say. If you
Right.
have value that is an organization that already has a lot of that same thing, or they don't really have a need for that, then you're not going to have a very fulfilling career, right? But the last thing is kind of pertaining to what you're saying, is the non-negotiables. So we don't often take a hold of our story by the horn and say, you know what, just as much as it's an honor for them to hire, it's an honor for me to work for them, but it's also an honor for them to hire me on, because I bring to the table certain things that are convictions and
Yep.
non-negotiables that, you know what, that may or may not be breaking the deal for me, right? Because when you've been working long enough, you've seen stories, you've seen it all, you've done that all, and you know what some of the traps are, right? Some of the areas that you're not so strong in, and some of the things that they're kind of dangerous areas. So yeah,
Yeah.
how do you in a world where there's a lot of assertiveness, where you're leading all these different teams in different countries, you go into there, you get different personalities, and the one thing that there's a lot of emphasis on is assertiveness training. How do you get points across in a manner that is authoritative, definitive, clear? It's not always sort of in line with being sort of humble, or kind of authentic kind of a thing. How have you sort of navigated all through that with your personality, and what do you do in those situations?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good one. I mean, for me, a lot of the times, the assertiveness is all about confidence, and confidence in what you're saying, and confidence in terms of being able to back up what you're saying. But also in the nature of not, people can smell someone who's trying to pull one over them. A smart
Right,
person can figure it out.
right,
And so that does go back to being authentic and being confident in what you say and how you support it. People will buy into that. I'm not very, there's the whole thing of being assertive, but there's ways of doing it in a way that, ensuring that people buy in and come along for the ride. And so, part of it is also not just being assertive, but also listening and getting feedback and ensuring that you've got an unbiased view in terms of the decisions you're making.
right,
That whole kind of dictatorship sort of telling people what to do and do this at all costs and feeling like, well, I'm sticking my neck out and I'm going to take a risk just by telling you.
right.
I don't think it doesn't work for me.
Yeah,
I haven't
yeah,
seen it work. But it's just more about, the ability to kind of make a decision, but do it based on feedback, listening, confidence, confidently being, and there is a point in time where, you've got to make a decision, you've got to stick your neck out, you've got to understand the risks, and you just do
right.
it. And
Yeah,
and you make sure that people are aware of why you're making that decision and whatnot. The interesting thing is that the cultures, the cultural differences. Like that's one thing that I've learned a lot having. My last role, I ran teams that were in Europe, Asia Pac, the US, and Canada. Definitely cultural differences between each, and there's always different view and a different approach in terms of understanding what makes people tick and what conviction they need to support a decision or to be along for the ride.
right,
A lot of times it still though does come back that would being, listening, having empathy, understanding what drives them forward, and ensuring that the decision you make kind of support that. So
right. So now moving forward to where you are today,
yep.
that decision to kind of join CPP and all of that, is this a continuation of things that you're learning, or kind of what made you make that decision now to move towards where you are?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing. I mean, for me, it was I was moving into an organization that's growing. They're at a natural pivot point from trying to now be we're on a path to a trillion in terms of AUM, assets under
Right,
management,
right,
and that the organization is at a point where we really need to pivot and ensure that we have the infrastructure to support that.
right,
So for me, it's change. Like it's challenge and it's change and it's exciting. But the other piece that really got me was purpose. So I've always worked for organizations that, are about shareholder value or, returns, etc. Where now the purpose is, you'll hear me say it, the 22 million Canadians that depend on us. And
Right.
it's not just about, the shareholder, it's about me, it's about you, it's about my mom, it's my dad, my family.
Right.
That's who matters now. That's the purpose behind it. And that's
Right.
really it's quite engaging. It's quite compelling and engaging when you start
Right.
thinking about what I'm doing matters to my family, and that just changes your view. I happen to be in investment management. I happen to be it's a fund. We do everything like any other large fund does, except our purpose are the Canadians that depend on us.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that really is an exciting, compelling reason to work where I work. Like you just it's just a different view. So that's
Right.
partly, yeah.
That kind of, that kind of jives with the kind of personality you are, right? It's sort of very purposeful, kind of purpose driven, overused term, but it's certainly sort of you see the purpose of benefiting Canadians. And
Yep.
because the CPP aspect of things impacts everybody, right? It's a bit of it's a very heavy responsibility, and I guess the one that you really enjoy doing because of the fact that it's got such wide impact, uh,
Absolutely.
repercussions, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's funny. Every now and then you kind of have to step back and remind yourself of what you're doing. Like even as we run large projects, it's like we're spending other people's money.
Right. Yeah.
I'm not like the money I'm spending is it's my mom's money. So
Yeah.
I have to keep thinking about things like that and why we do things. And it's a very different. It might not sound it, but it's very different than being an organization that's say shareholder value driven, where it's a different focus. We have similar concerns and worries around costs and expense and profitability, but the underlying purpose of it's different. And so that,
Right.
that changes the way you look at it.
Gotcha. I want to switch gears a little bit to talking about struggles and areas of weaknesses and periods of
Yep.
time where you had to go through a difficult time. Um, can you share with us, if you're comfortable with, a period of time or a certain instance where it was a real challenging kind of impactful thing on whatever it was, the way that you did things or your personality was rubbing maybe against the wrong way as far as your personal conviction? And what do you do during times of difficulty to kind of get through that? Right.
Yeah. Whew. It's a good one. I think, for me, there's, you face challenge along this journey all the time. And every time it's, looks and feels a little bit different each time.
Right.
So I wouldn't point to like one single point in time that made me go, is this, is this a point of reflection, whatever. I mean,
Right.
early in my career, would be, I'm a very, you don't get it, but I'm a very shy person by nature.
Okay.
I'm not great. And even to this day, I'm not great at going out and socializing and networking. And, everybody tells you got to build a network and you got to grow your network and your net.
Yeah.
I don't like cocktail parties after conferences. I tend to run from them if I can.
Yeah.
And that was something I've always had to get over in my career, is that natural wanting to kind of like, shrink in and be shy.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and I've found ways around that, through actually technology has been my friend when it comes to things like that. I find it much easier to do this than to say, go into a room and try and shake hands and meet people. Um, but, that was one thing for me, was trying to get over that. And a big piece also of getting over that was back to the whole confidence in what I'm speaking about,
Right.
understanding my topic, not caring as much. It's going to sound really kind of not caring as much what people think about me. Like
Right.
that for me was, I always worried that I always wanted everybody to like me. And I always kind of got to a point that not everybody's going to like you. Not everybody's going to love what you have to say or your
Right.
content or feedback. So kind of getting through that, and then understanding that at least one person out there might get some value, and that's enough. That's enough for me.
Yeah.
And along the way, I've people you work with, you always had struggles in terms of people I've worked with or worked for.
Right. Right.
I've had amazing leaders in my career, and some have been, tough on me, and there's been conflict. but I've always taken something away from it. I've always learned something from it, learned something about myself,
Right.
grown in one way, shape, or form. I've had struggles with, a career where, when I landed in the UK with TD, right into a storm with regulators, and that was a real high stress, high struggle environment.
Right.
Make sure that you're doing the right thing. And for me at the time, it was into an environment that I had just moved from a finance role into an operations role. And at the time, I actually didn't know anything about operations. My early thing, I had breadth. I had, I scraped the surface, and suddenly now I'm in front of regulators trying to sound like I know what I'm doing.
Right.
And you just tend to just kind of rely back on, well, what are the skills I have? Why was I put into this role? Why did they pick me?
Yeah.
And just make sure, someone has confidence in me to do this. So they make sure I just bring those to the forefront and make those shine. So, it's the only other time for me was just when I left TD. Like that was obviously a point and a pivot and a stress and a point in my life where it's like, am I making the right decision? Am I doing the right thing here?
Right.
And you just kind of, you've got to have conviction. When you make those decisions, you have conviction in the decision you make, and then you just follow through. So
right. Yeah. And that integrity piece comes into play, right? You do what you say, and you say what you do. If you were to kind of crystal ball, let's say you're a career coach, right? You're in my shoes, and you're talking with an executive or someone who's going into a senior leadership role, who's asking the question, what do I need to do to equip myself to succeed in the coming days, right? What are 2 or 3 kind of skills or capabilities or things, personality, whatever it is, that you would say are important to being a good leader in the coming future, given all that's going on with technology and everything like that?
Yeah, I mean, a big one for me is the ability to listen and connect with your team and your people.
Okay.
And whether it's the team that works directly for you or the team that surrounds you. And even more so now where we're in an environment where, as we're working from home and you're not seeing people at the water cooler or walking around, you have to, purposely get out there and connect with people, make it part of your day to day to connect with at least so many people and have conversations and listen and really listen to what their issues are, what their concerns are, what their worries are, and figure out if you've got ways to address those. I mean, as a leader, a lot of what I do is about, taking information in, processing it, and then trying to make the smart decision that I think is going to move us forward. How are we going to take that next step? How are we going to innovate? How are we going to grow? And not just about the organization, but also the people involved, et cetera. So for me, it's the big thing is just about listening and getting to know people. The other piece for me, because it's pretty fresh, is when you come into a new role as a leader, you've got to have a vision. You've got to think about where do I see myself in 30, 60, 90 days, but even further out, go out 2 years.
Right. Sure.
And what's that vision? You've got to understand that you will likely pivot and you will likely make choices along the way to take different turns. But you've at least got to have that view of where you're going and what you're doing. And then you supplement it as you go, as you learn. But those are kind of, and I mean, they're fresh to me because that's what I did coming into this role, was trying to understand, all right, what's my vision going forward, and listen to my people, get a good feel for what's happening below. Cause again, it's, you've heard it before, you're only as good as your team. And so it's really important to understand what that team's saying, and what they care about.
Gotcha. So in this role now, you've got a tremendous challenge in front of you that, it is a lot of weight. But I think what it sounds like is that your career has really prepared you well for sort of this time period now and the role that you've been given, right?
Hope so.
No, I mean, it's very clear. And one of the great foundational training of consulting is that it does teach you to kind of learn in real time and be able to kind of know just enough to be able to learn more, right? And I always say that is, in order to learn, you need to know stuff, right? And then when you know stuff, you're ready to learn more about that. So, and I think that's a skill that some people don't have that. It's and it's fine. It's a different skill set, right? To be able to kind of be given a role description and say, this is what you need to do, and just keep doing it until it's really good. But yours is more of a growth mindset based on using a little bit of common sense. It sounds like listening for what people have to say, and then you ultimately have to take responsibility for building the vision behind that, right?
Yeah.
So that's really awesome. What do you think is going to change coming out of COVID? Like, how is your leadership going to have to be different? And with all this thing about work from home, etc. Like,
Yeah, it's it's interesting because it's the biggest question that I always have is, how do you build a strong culture when everybody's working from home?
yeah,
How do you ensure, like, one of the things that really resonates, and I've heard about it, and I have seen it with CPP now, is the culture.
yeah,
And people always ask, well, if we're all at home, how do you maintain that? And I'll be honest, I don't have an answer yet. Like, I definitely don't. I think the biggest thing for me that's changed with COVID is ensuring that I take more of a concerted effort to reach out and speak to people and
right,
speak to everybody. So I do, regular weekly, what I call coffee chats with a group of 6 to 8 people every week, and just to across all levels within my team. Just to kind of get out and get a pulse and a feel for what's happening, what's going on, to make
right,
myself available. Because you're not in the office, you're not walking the floor, you're not. And that's
yeah,
what I like to do. I like to get out and walk around and say hi to people and get to
yeah,
know them and
yeah,
understand what makes them tick. And in this environment, you don't have that ability. So it's really, you have to make a concerted effort. You almost have, like for me, you book it into your calendar. I'm going to spend time talking to these people today. I'm going
right,
to purposely follow up and create that water cooler conversation somehow. It might not be the same because it's
yeah,
structured, but you
yeah,
almost have to figure out ways to create that banter that you have. How do you find that?
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
it will be interesting as we go forward still. I mean, I think, the one thing I've said to my team and others is just, expect change. Expect, like, if you're looking for a definitive set plan of how things are going to happen, it's not going to be there.
right,
Like, we
right,
were due to be back in the office this week,
right,
even on a reduced schedule, and that got pushed back because of Omicron. So you just have to expect that things are going to be very fluid.
yeah,
There's no set answer. We as an organization, and even myself, you have to be open that, people are now discovering that they're able to manage their life in a different way. And so
yeah,
your work day looks different. Your work week looks different. It's not I never lived by this, but it's not a 9 to 5. I got work to do, and I'm going to get it done in a period of time. And I may do it here, I may do it there.
yeah,
And I may jump up at 3 to go pick my kids up from school. And that's okay,
yeah,
and that's fine.
yeah,
Um, and so I think that's just, some people getting their heads wrapped around that. That is, the days will look different. People will come in at 10 and leave at 2,
yeah,
or, like that. That's the expectation. And we all have to figure out how to work around it. But
yeah. And it's a challenge that's definitely not unique to your environment
it's
and
everybody. Yeah.
your leadership, right?
Yeah.
Um, the the skill sets that you need to be developing to function well in the future are have actually been quite shaped by what COVID is going to do. So, for instance, where you may have been needed to be more technical going forward, assuming that you would have worked together with your team physically, now it's going to be more about sort of interpretation, about taking technical things and being able to tell and explain it to maybe senior folks in a way that you don't have the luxury of sort of the back and forth when you're trying to get to a problem to solve.
Yeah.
It'll be pretty clear up front. And so a lot of learning around how do I take something that's difficult as a concept and translate that. Man, that's a skill that takes years of practice. And so, it various different people are going to need to look at themselves and say, I'm good at these things. I'm not good at certain things. And the things I'm not good at, do I care about actually getting better at that? And if I don't care about it, then okay, fine. Let's find the
Yeah.
role, make it work, right? Cool.
Yeah. And I mean, and the big thing for us too is a recognition of some things will take more time to do now. Like, it's,
Yeah,
so we've got a large project that we're doing right now. And, in the past, we'd all sit in a boardroom and we'd be in front of a whiteboard and we'd map everything out and we'd
yeah,
ask questions and Our
Yeah.
consultants would be on site with us, and it was easy to just turn.
Yeah.
You don't necessarily have that. So you have more structured, more formal conversations. You try to replicate the whiteboards as best as you can, but it's never quite the same.
Yeah.
And so that just things take more time. It takes a little, and so you have to recognize that. And to your point, that whole, it takes more time to go back and forth and explain and understand,
Yeah.
because this is the means of how we're communicating with people.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
it's just
Sure.
not the same. So
Great. Well, that's really cool to hear your journey. And there's so many more questions I wanted to ask about how you got into being the personality that you are, but we're sort of limited on time. So um, I might have you back to share a little bit more about
sure, I'd
this.
love to. I'd love to.
But I'm going to end off here with a couple of rapid fire questions that I always
Sure.
do. And they're questions that if anybody's seen me before, you kind of recycle them, but they're always really interesting answers. So I've got several for you. So number one is, what is your alter ego profession?
My alter ego profession.
If you weren't doing what you're doing,
I'd run a gym.
you would run a gym. Okay.
Yeah, I have a home gym in my house, and I love all the gear, and so I would run a gym, even though in today's environment probably wouldn't be all that profitable.
Yeah.
I'd run a gym. I'd love to have my own gym.
Do you have a Peloton?
Yes,
Oh, okay. So you're one of those guys. Gotcha.
yeah, I'm a Peloton, but I'm also I'm a weights and plates and powerlifting junkie. So, but
Gotcha.
I do drink the Peloton Kool-Aid.
Wow. Okay. What is one word that you love?
One word that I love. You probably heard me say authentic.
Okay. Yep. Got that. What's one word that you hate?
One word that I hate. Oh, geez, one word.
And inauthentic does not count.
I wish it was one word, but it's one thing that drives me crazy
Okay. What is it?
is because we've always done it that way.
Okay. Okay.
And that applies not just to work, that applies anywhere. That drives me nuts.
What if the way that we've done it that way is the best way?
I don't agree. There's always better. There's never best. There's always better.
Gotcha. What's one title of a book or a movie that would best describe your career journey?
Book or movie? Wow. Jeez.
Superman versus Batman. No.
Yeah. I wish. No. Book or movie that's trying to think.
Yeah, no problem. Take your time. It's very interesting, the answers that I've gotten before.
Book or movie that's would explain my career journey. I don't know, man.
Okay. Well, what's your favorite movie?
Swingers. Vince Vaughn and Jon Favreau. It's probably one of my favorites. If not, being, born and bred Canadian, I love Slapshot. So
Sure. Okay. Yep. Fair enough. And I'm sure it'll come to the irritating thing is that it'll come to your mind at the most inopportune time after the interview.
Probably.
Like, I should have said that.
Yeah.
Okay. So final thing is, what's one COVID hobby or habit that you developed?
One COVID hobby or habit. What would be one for me? I mean, I got more deep into the home gym life. Like there's a whole culture out there of home gym people.
Okay.
And I'm even more embedded into that, whether it be on Facebook groups or meta groups, whatever you want to call it, or I've got a room in my basement that is completely outfitted, and so that I've gotten deeper into that. That was probably the one thing that came out of. I always had it in COVID, but it's even more so now.
Right. Yeah, I'm looking for a place to kind of work out. I'll just find out where you live, and
Sure. I always say that to people. I've got a room that rivals most gyms. So
Yeah.
by all means.
Cool. Well, Mike, thanks so much for your time today. It's been a real delight catching up with you, and Yeah, I wish you all the best, and it's really inspiring to hear the story. I think the particular one that will hit home the most is the permission to give yourself to kind of step away and reflect a little bit and reset as well. And the reality is that a lot of people can't do that. They can't afford to do that because of financial situations. But the concept of being able to do that and needing to take a step back is important to remember. So, but thank you so much once again, and
Thank you.
wishing you the very best. And I'm sure I'll see you around. You should hit the podcast again, because I think I did listen to one of them, and I thought it was very professionally done. So
Thank you. Thank you. No, I
yeah,
appreciate it. Thanks for giving me the time. I do, I like sharing my story, my journey, and, hopefully people get something from it. Like I
yeah,
said, as long as one person gets something from it, it's worth it. So
yeah,
thanks for giving me this opportunity. I appreciate it.
for sure. All right, well, have a good weekend, and
Thank
I'll
you.
talk
You
to you
too.
soon. Take
Sounds
care.
good.
Bye.
See you, man.
Bye. All right, so that was uh, that was an awesome, another really wonderful, insightful interview, and hopefully you were inspired by Mike's story. I think, the way that the authenticity that he's communicating, I think it's always been there. If I remember kind of me being a junior consultant and him being more senior, that was sort of the impression that I had from him all the time. So, some things never change. And one of the things that I talk a lot about when you talk about value proposition is um, kind of remembering what your roots were. And we do that a lot when we think about where we came from, right? The humble upbringings and kind of where we got. But I think a lot of the root stems also from your character, your personality, the things that really matter to you the most. And um, naturally speaking, when we follow the course life journey of life, we start a career, but that career has expectations of us that start pulling us down a path whereby over time we may pick up some skills or things that we don't really care too much about, and pretty soon you find yourself pretty far down the path where there's a huge expectation for you to demonstrate and show those skills that are not really what you want to do. And finding your value really means going back to the very beginning and saying, when you had two jobs coming out of university, college, why did you choose a certain one over the other? And kind of reconnecting with that as you think about your executive career now. So anyway, have a good weekend, guys. And I will be rebooking new guests coming up soon. So I think season 2 will start probably in March again. So take care, and see you guys for now.